And just as a reminder, for more Microsoft webcasts, you can visit microsoft.com/webcasts. And again, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's MSDN webcast, the guided hands-on lab, building a Word document using Visual Basic and SQL Server data. And now, without any further delay, I'm going to turn the floor over to today's presenter, Peter Thock.
Thank you, Tracy, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Tracy mentioned, we'll be dynamically building a Word document today using Visual Basics 2005, and we'll be pulling data from our SQL Server database. Before I continue, let me remind everyone that if you will be participating in the virtual lab console, if you will be doing, if you will be doing exercises along with me, you should start up your virtual lab right now because it will take a few minutes to spin up. And while that's going on, I can go over some prerequisites with you. So basically, there are two ways you could use this labcast. The first is to watch and listen to the presentation in Office live meeting, just as how you're right now. And I'm going to go through each exercise and explain what each line of code does and show you the end result of the application. The second and preferred way to use a labcast is to participate in the virtual lab console. This allows you to actually enter in the code and run the application and gives you a real hands-on feel for what's involved in the presentation. So if you do have that opportunity, I recommend that you take advantage of that. If you are joining us from Enterprise, you may not be able to connect to Virtual Lab due to firewall or proxy issues. If that's the case, then your only option is to watch and listen to the presentation in live meeting. If you will be using the Virtual Lab console, you will be required to install the ActiveX control, and you will be required to have Windows Internet Explorer 6 or later. Now, when you're in the Virtual Lab console, there will be a lab manual to the right of the screen for you to follow. And that window might be a bit narrow, so when you're following it, be sure to scroll all the way to the right to make sure you see every bit of instruction and line of code. If it's still too narrow, then you do have the option of downloading it and printing it out as a PDF. Okay. If you have any questions, the good thing about Labcast is that we have live people to answer your questions. There are two places for you to ask questions. First is in the live meeting Q&A panel. Questions in here should pertain to troubleshooting issues, if you don't have audio, if you're having problems connecting to the virtual lab console, things of that nature. The second place to enter questions is in the virtual lab console. Questions in here should pertain to problems you have while doing the exercises. You know, if your project doesn't run, if you know, you can't get it to work for some reason, one of our proctors will go in and actually see the same virtual machine that you're viewing, and will be able to help you because they can see the code and everything. So please separate your questions in that regards, and we can help you better. Okay, so we do have a promotion going on currently. If you register for one VB 2005 Labcast and fill out the evaluation, you will be eligible for selected chapters from Francisco Bellina's book, Programming Microsoft Visual Basics 2005, the language, 35% off estimated retail value of selected Microsoft Visual Studio 2005 books, and Visual Basic 2005 keyboard shortcut reference poster. You will receive an email about a month and a half after you fill out the evaluation on how to redeem these rewards. Now, if you attend two VB 2005 Labcasts and fill out the evaluations, you will be eligible for one complimentary copy of Visual Studio 2005 Standard Edition software. Once again, an email will be sent to you about a month and a half after you complete your second evaluation. This promotion is only available to U.S. residents. Okay, so a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to have three exercises, and exercise 1 and 2 will actually be the same project. We'll be creating a Word document with 3 columns, and these columns will be tab delimited. The data for the columns will be pulled from a SQL Server data that's located locally in the virtual machine. And in exercise 3, we'll be building a Word table and populating that table with data or with files from our local C drive. So you will see the file name, the data is modified, and the file size. Once again, exercise 1, we're just going to start creating a Word document and just start creating a document header and setting our tab delimiters for our data. So I'm going to go over to my virtual lab console and get that started. Okay, now I have Visual Studio started up. Just to save a few seconds. If you haven't done so already, it is in the Start menu, and it is right between Email and Visual Basic 2006, and that'll bring up this console, your Visual Studio 2005 application. Before I continue, let me show you what our final product will look like for exercise 1 and 2, so you can get a better grasp of what we're doing and how the end result will look like. So here we have our table. It's tab delimited. We have a title called Supplier Phone List. Now this document was created dynamically by running my application. I created it earlier just to show you folks what it'll look like. Okay, let me scroll back to the top. And then each column will have a column header, company name, contact, phone number, and below that, everything else will be pulled from our database. So we have the the company name, and then we have the contact, and we have the phone number for each contact. And once again, these 3 columns are tab delimited. So this is what it'll look like. Okay, now moving back to Visual Studio. To start off, I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to go up to File, New Project, and under Visual Basic, under Office, it's going to be a Word document. And I'm just going to rename it. I'm going to call it Build Word Doc SQL. And I'm going to accept the default name it creates for me and hit OK. All right, so when I create a project, it's going to automatically open up this build Word doc SQL.document file. I'm not going to need this, so I'm just going to close it out and right-click on the VB file, this document.vb, and select View Code. Okay, so in this labcast, there will be a lot of code to generate the Word document, and to save some time, I created some snippets that I can just drag over to my code, and I won't have to type everything out and risk having a typo and my project not running. These snippets are also available to you. They're on the left side under Toolbox, and they're called Word SQL snippets. So feel free to use it if you don't feel like typing either. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new function to create the header of our document. So all I'm going to do is double-click my first snippet, and it creates the code for me. All right, so we have create header here, and we define a Word.range object, and we call it RNG. Now, a range is an object within a Word document. It's actually basically it's an area within a document, or an area within an object that you can reference. So the entire Word document can have a range. A cell in a table can have a range. A bookmark on the Word document can have a range. So you'll be seeing this range a lot being used throughout the entire project. So after we specify the range, let me just create more space here by making my Solution Explorer smaller. So after we create the range, we're going to clear everything within it just to make sure we work with a clean slate. And we do that by using me.range.delete. And then we set the page orientation to landscape. Oh, I forgot to mention that we are able to create this Word document in Visual Studio by downloading Visual Studio Tools for Office. It's available free as a plugin for Visual Studio 2005. And in order to download it, just go to Microsoft.com and do a search for Visual Studio Tools for Office. And you should find the second edition. So it'll be VSTOSE. SE stands for second edition. And the second edition actually works with Office 2003 and Office 2007, but you still need Visual Studio 2005. The download isn't too big. It's about 6 megabytes. So just download the executable and run it, and it will install a plugin for you. And that's where I got the Word document template when I created the project. Okay, now going back to our code. After I set the landscape, or the orientation to landscape, I'm going to define some values for my tab stops. So since I'm going to have 3 columns, I only need 2 tab stops. The first is going to be a value of 4, and then a 6. This is just an array of values to store the points at my tab stop. I just define this at the top, so it'll be easier to change if we wanted to change the distance of the tab stops. So they're just integers used when we define our actual tab stops. Next, we actually set the range to position 0, 0. This ensures that our range is at the very top left corner of our document. Okay. Now we're actually writing text to our Word document. And we do that by using the range.insertBefore function. And it takes a string as a parameter, and we're going to have it write supplier phone list. And we also set the font and the formatting to the range. So we set the font to Verdana, the font size to 16, and we insert 2 paragraphs after, so we leave some space between the page title and the beginning of our tab delimited table. Okay, now we create a new range because our first range was just for a header, and we set the font and the font size just for the header. So for our table, we want different formatting, and that's why we create a new range. And we do that by using the setRange function. The setRange takes no parameters, but it has 2 optional parameters, start and end. So we set the start of the range to the end position of our previous range, and we set the end position once again to the end position of our previous range. The reason why we use range.end for both start and end is because our range expands dynamically as you add items to it. So you don't need to try to predict how big your range is going to end up being or how long it's going to be. It's just going to dynamically expand. Like I said, start and end are optional, and you can tell because of this := sign. This is a VB exclusive operator, and it signifies that the start and end parameters are optional. And not only are they optional, but they don't have to be set in that order. It can be in any order. End can come before start, and it will work just fine because these parameters are name parameters. The setRange function knows that it's looking for a start parameter and an end parameter, and as long as you say start : it'll know which value to use. And that's when the : comes quite handy in Visual Basics. All right, so we have our new range, and now we're going to define a format, a paragraph format. And we're going to set the format to the range.paragraph format. This is another way to reference an area in our Word document using the paragraph format. Okay, let's see what's next. Okay, using our format, we're going to clear all tab stops to make sure that we're working with a clean slate, and then define 2 tab stops. And these will be our columns for our tables. So to define tab stops, we use the format.tabstops.add, and it takes 3 parameters. The first is the point, or the area that you want the tab stop to be. So we're using our value from our array that we defined earlier. Let me just scroll up there. My network seems to be a little slow today. Okay, so remember up here we defined an array called tab stops, and we just gave it 2 values. So the first is here, which is actually a 4. And we converted from inches to points, and this is going to be the first tab stop for our columns. We align the text with a tab stop left, and we lead it with spaces as opposed to dots or anything else. We do the same thing with the second tab stop, but this time we use the second value in our array, which is a 6. Once again, we align it left and lead it with spaces. Okay, now we're going to create our column headers. To do that, we reference the range.text attribute, and we specify the text. So we say the first one is going to be company name, and because we have our tab stops created already, instead of just hitting spaces or anything like that, we just call our tab stops after company name, and then we have contacts. Once again, another tab stop, and the phone number. Once again, we define formatting for our range. It's going to be font family Verdana, font size 10. We're going to set it to bold, and we're going to underline the range. Okay, so our column headers are set. The next thing to do is create tab stops and a range for the body of our tab delimited table. So we're going to create a paragraph after the range to create some space from between our headers and our body, and we're going to create a new range. Once again, we use a set range function, and we set the start to the end of the previous range and the end position to the end of the previous range once again. And we once again defined a format, a new format to work with. And this range will hold the actual data that we're pulling from the database. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing that we did with the column header range. We're going to clear all tab stops to make sure we're working with a clean slate. And we're going to add 2 tab stops. Once again, we use the tabstops.add function, and we use the value from our array that we declared previously. We align the text to be left, and instead of leading the tab stops with spaces, we now lead it with dots. If you remember from our Word document, there are dots between the columns in the body, and that's where this comes from. Let me just go back to the Word document real quick. There you go. So there are spaces between the headers, and the line is actually because the range is set to underline, but those are spaces. And in the body of our table, there are dots. Okay, so after the first column header, we define after the first tab stop, we define a second tab stop using our value from the tab stop array, align it left, and we lead it with dots once again. So we're not actually going to insert data from our database in this exercise. We're going to do it in exercise 2, but we're just setting up the tab steps so we could use them in exercise 2 to populate from our database. Next thing we're going to do is add a bookmark. A bookmark is a good way to reference a position in a Word document also, because we can reference it by name. To add a bookmark, we use the me.bookmarks.add, and we give it a bunch of optional parameters. The name, we're going to call it data, and this is what we're going to reference it by in exercise 2. We specify the range it's going to reside in, and we say the range is going to be the current range that we're working with. And after that range, we insert a paragraph to make some room on the bottom. Okay, so that does it for this function. I'm going to go back up to the top, and I'm going to create a function to call our create header function when the document opens. To do that, I'm just going to add some space after the shutdown function. And use my last snippet in exercise 1. So this function is called thisDocument_open, and it's called every time the Word document is open. And what it does is it sets screen updating equals false, because screen updating actually updates the Word document every time a function is called. So we don't want that. We actually want it to update at the very end when all the functions are done and we're done creating our table. So after we set it to false, we call the create header function. And finally, we turn screen updating to true because we want the Word document to update with the data that we just inserted into it. All right, so that's it. I'm going to go run my project and see how it turns out. And there you go. As you see, we have our header, and we have our title, and we have our column headers delimited by tabs with spaces. And here is our bookmark. This gray eye shape is the bookmark we're going to reference in exercise 2 to populate data from our database. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my slide deck and give you 5 minutes to try it out. It shouldn't take too long if you use the snippets. If you feel like typing it, don't feel any pressure. The virtual lab will be open 2 hours after this labcast ends, so take your time, work at your own pace, and we'll be back after 5 minutes to continue to exercise 2. And we have this string here, which looks a bit funny if you haven't used it before, but it's actually pretty useful if you want to format your string without having all those awkward ampersands and underscores and things like that. These are essentially placeholders. Each placeholder is in a curly bracket or curly brace. And since we have 5 placeholders here, we need to define 5 items right after that. So placeholder 0 will actually have the first column from our data reader, which is the company name. And then we're going to have a tab stop, and that's going to take placeholder 1. Now these tab stops are what we defined in exercise 1. These are the dot led tab stops that we defined. And then after that tab stop, we have the contact name from a data reader, another tab stop that we defined, and finally the phone number from the database. And we store this in our string writer class, or string writer object actually. Now we're going to output the contents of our string writer to the Word document. To do that, we need a range to work with. So the range we're going to use is from the bookmark that we defined in exercise 1. Remember, we called it data. So this range, or this bookmark, has a range, and we're going to use that range to dump our data to. So we set the range.text to the contents of our string writer. And then we set formatting once again. The font family is going to be Verdana, and the font size is going to be 10. The next thing we need to do is make sure our data reader is closed, because that's also expensive. So if anything goes wrong while reading from our database and outputting to the Word document, we catch the exception, and regardless of what happens, we're always going to close the data reader object. But first we need to check if it's open. If it is open, then we call dr.close to close it. Okay, so that's all it takes to populate our table. The last thing we're going to do is add a call to the function we just created, and that's going to be after create header in our this document underscore open function. Okay, so now let's see what it looks like. And there we go. So we had our page title and our column headers in exercise 1, and we inserted our data from our database. Notice it's right where the bookmark is. The bookmark is that gray eye shape. And then we have our first column, our tab stops that are led by dots, our contact, another tab stop, and our phone number. So there you go. Everything is from the database. Okay, I'm going to try to go back to my slides now. That's strange. Okay, so I can't seem to go back to my slides. While I'm trying to resolve this, now we're going to move on to exercise 3. So in exercise 3, we're going to create a table in Word, a traditional table with several cells and a border and everything. I'm going to add formatting to it and populate the table with the information about the files on the C drive of our virtual machine. So let's get started with that. Okay, before I start coding, let me show you what the final product's going to look like. This here I created really quickly before the labcast. And as you can see, it creates a new page title, and we place everything above the previous information that we worked with in exercise 1 and 2. So we create a page title here, and then we have a table with file names from our C drive, and there are 3 columns, the file name, the size, and the date it was last modified. Okay, so I'm going to just close that and start building that in Visual Studio. So after my retrieve suppliers function, I'm going to add a new function. And I'm going to call it create table. I'm going to define a new range, and I'm going to set the range to 0, 0. This ensures that my new range will be at the very top left position. That's why the word table that we're creating now is actually above the tab delimited table we created in the first 2 exercises. Now I'm going to insert text before, and it takes a string. That's going to be the title. And I'm going to format it with Verdana, font size 16, and insert 2 paragraphs after that range. Okay, so the next step in the lab manual says to go back up to our open function and actually make a call to create table. So I'm just going to do that real quickly. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to head back down to my create table function. So after creating the title in the previous range, I create a new range with the setRange function, just as before, taking 2 parameters. And then I create a table using me.tables.add. This adds a table to the Word document, and I'm going to pass it 3 parameters. It's going to be the range that the table is going to reside in, which is the current range that we're working with. I'm going to set it to have 1 row, just for now, and 3 columns. Okay, this next snippet is actually pretty long, so let me scroll back up. Okay, so now I'm going to format the table. I'm adding a reference to the table so I can work with it, and it's going to be set to me.tables.1, which is actually the only table I have. The font size is going to be 8. Font family is going to be Verdana. And this table.styles attribute actually uses preset tables defined in Word. So if you know any styling that or formatting that's already set in Word, you could reference it by name instead of having to define your own styles. Then the next 3 lines just ensures that the formatting applies to the first row only, which is going to serve as our column headers, and the formatting doesn't apply to the rest of the rows. Now we're going to insert text for our column headers. First thing we're going to do is insert the name column, and we're going to reference the cell. So row 1, column 1, dot range. So we're referencing the range of this cell, and we set the text attribute to print out name. For the second column, it's a little bit different, but not that different. We define a range, and then we set the range to row 1, column 2 range. Set the text size, and the only other thing we do differently is set the alignment to right. And we do the same thing for the third row, or I'm sorry, the third column. We set the text to modified, and we set the alignment to right. Okay, I'm going to run my application and see what we have so far. All right, so we have my title here, and we have 1 row, the 1 row table that I defined with name, size, and modified. The reason why the background is blue, the text is white, and it's formatted like that is because we use the predefined style. Let's see if I can find it. Table grid 8. And that's why it looks like that. All right, so I'm going to go back to my code and finish things up. In order to read data from our local file directory, I'm going to have to add another import statement. So I'm going to go back to the top, and insert import system.io. This allows us to read files and folders on our local machine. Okay, now I'm going to go back down, collapse my create table to create some room, and add a new function right below that. This function will do all the work in reading the files and getting all the information and populating our table. So what we need to do is we need to add a reference to the table that we created in our create table function. and we add a file info object to read file information and a directory info object to access the C drive of our local virtual machine. Then we create an integer. We're going to call it I, and we're going to set it to 2 because we want to start with the second row of our table, because the first row actually contains our column headers. So now we're going to loop through each file in the C drive, the local C drive, and we're going to write it to our table. So for each file in di.getFiles, that actually returns an array of files within that directory, we're going to add a row to the table. Then within that row, we're going to set the first column text to the name of our file, the text of the second column to the length of that file. The length is actually the file size of the file. And here we have the curly braces again as placeholders. The n represents a number, so it's going to format the F5, the length, as a number. Then we set the third column to the last write time, which is the last date modified. We have our placeholders here again. G represents a date, so it's going to format this as a date. And then we increment I to move on to the next file, so we're not in an infinite loop. And that's all it takes to read through our files. The very last thing we need to do is add a call to it in our this document _ open. Okay, there we go. Now I'm just going to hit this little green arrow to run the application, and we'll see what we have. Okay, so alongside our first row, we have about 9 files in the C drive, the root of the C drive. There's our size, that's formatting in numbers, and our last modified formatted as a date. There you go. Okay, once again, I'm going to go back to my slides and give you 5 minutes to finish things up, and we will be back to wrap things up. And yeah, so good luck with exercise 3. Hopefully you had a chance to complete exercise 3. If you didn't, or if you didn't complete exercise 1 or 2, the virtual lab console will be open for another 2 hours, so take your time. If you would like to retake this virtual lab or try other labs, you can visit msdn.microsoft.com/virtuallab. Also, if you don't have a version of Visual Studio to play with, you can download a trial at msdn2.microsoft.com/vstudio/default.aspx. All right, so that does it for me. This is the end of the Labcast. Hopefully you folks learned something new here. I had a lot of fun presenting this. And I hope to see you next time. Now I'm going to throw things back over to Tracy to wrap things up. And once again, thanks for attending.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. I do want to remind everybody that for more information, they can print to PDF the slides today. Just go to the File menu in your upper navigation bar. Now, feel free to continue to submit your questions into the Q&A panel found at the bottom of your live meeting screen. I'm going to be posting a survey here in just a minute, and if you would all please take a moment to fill it out before you log off. We do appreciate your feedback. And as a reminder, for upcoming and previously recorded webcasts, you'll want to visit microsoft.com/webcasts. This Labcast will be available for download in about 48 to 72 hours. And if you have any webcast content ideas, or there's something out there you would like to see and haven't yet, we would love to hear from you. Just take note of this link here. And for anybody who's interested in receiving a free 14-day trial of Microsoft Office Live Meeting, you'll want to visit microsoft.com/presentlive. Now, a little incentive for filling out that survey today. You're going to be automatically entered in to win this 30-gigabyte Zune digital media player. And here's the survey. Please follow the links provided to complete today's webcast evaluation. And with that, I do want to extend a very special thank you to Peter for your presentation today. I also want to thank the audience for attending today's MSDN Labcast. Ladies and gentlemen, this will conclude today's session. The audience may now disconnect from the audio portion of today's presentation.